Hello, I'm Sabrina Joy Stevens, a movement builder, storyteller, and strategist based in Washington, D.C. I've had the honor of contributing to some of the most impactful movements and campaigns of the past 2 decades, including serving some of America's leading labor and civil rights organizations. I've also spent much of the past few years doing the real-world work of countering disinformation alongside experts in the field. Now, I'm taking what I've learned from those experiences and training others on how we can communicate more strategically so we can neutralize disinformation campaigns while promoting our own campaigns for justice, democracy, and the environment. While anyone can be honestly mistaken about something and unknowingly spread misinformation, disinformation is false or misleading information that bad actors intentionally spread in order to manipulate people. Disinformation is a global problem, but the bad actors responsible for it are a very small subset of the global population. That means they can't succeed without tricking the rest of us into helping them. Fortunately, it is possible to inoculate ourselves and others against the harms of disinformation. As more of us learn and teach others how to develop the awareness and discipline we need to embed inoculation tactics within every aspect of our organizing, we can help build our community's defenses against disinformation. Please note, when I refer to bad actors who wage disinformation campaigns, I'm talking about political and economic actors who hoard power and wealth by manipulating people into taking actions against our individual and collective best interests. They do this in a variety of ways, all of which tend to be variations of the same 3 political manipulation tactics: divide and conquer, or attempts to foster conflict that keeps people from banding together or incites them to fight each other instead of unjust policies and practices. So think of things like culture war campaigns that pit different kinds of people against each other so they don't unite to strengthen democracy or achieve economic justice. There's mislead and misdirect, or attempts to trick people into making bad decisions or perpetuating harmful systems by lying to them. For example, think of fossil fuel profiteers who sow confusion about the climate crisis in order to delay meaningful action. Then there's overwhelm and exhaust, or efforts to inundate people with so much negative information that they give up trying to do anything. Because we outnumber the bad actors sowing chaos in our communities, we have considerable power to neutralize their efforts over time. So let's dig into some practical ways we can do exactly that. Trust is essential for our ability to come together and solve problems with different kinds of people. But public trust in institutions is very low as a result of past and ongoing discrimination in our society. Unfortunately, those realities also empower bad actors to exploit true stories of discrimination and abuse in science, government, and elsewhere to exacerbate well-founded mistrust among people, especially Black and Indigenous people here in the US and all over the world. When science advocates don't acknowledge and address those concerns, bad actors use that silence to undermine the legitimacy of all authorities and institutions and the valid information they provide. As much as we may want to rely on just the facts to win over skeptical members of the public, the facts alone have no power if the people we're sharing them with don't trust that we're telling them the truth. Remember, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So here are some ways to convey that you care and rebuild trust in individual conversations. First, keep a calm, non-judgmental attitude. Prioritize empathy over expertise. Look for points of connection, for example, love of community, love of future generations, shared faith, etc. Look for and acknowledge their underlying concerns, and then use your expertise to explain the truth in a way that speaks to those underlying concerns. Looking beyond individual conversations, we also want to make the most of opportunities to build trust between our organizations and communities that bad actors have discriminated against. For example, instead of just talking about how discrimination exacerbates the climate crisis in communities of color, consider sharing preparedness kits with people in those communities as an entry point for deeper relational organizing. Other ways we can rebuild trust among our organizations and communities include showcasing our organization's contributions to community improvement efforts, like partnerships with local schools or environmental restoration projects. Visibly advocate for justice and accountability in your field to repair past and ongoing harms. And share resources and expertise with trusted community institutions like churches and civic organizations. The latter is especially important because sometimes you may not be the best messenger. So creating relationships with those who are already trusted messengers within the community may be the best way to get your information out. Rebuilding trust takes time and intention, but is absolutely essential for building the sense of shared reality bad actors have eroded. Fortunately, every interaction we have presents an opportunity to help reestablish trust and credibility among our communities. So let's keep talking about ways we can make the most of those opportunities. Bad actors are outnumbered, so they work hard to trick others into spreading their messages, even those of us who know they're false. One of the most important things we can do to help fight disinformation is to stop spreading it and to amplify better ideas instead. For example, bad actors exploit misguided attempts to warn people about bad information, like when someone shares a link to a misleading article to explain why it's problematic, or tries to debunk disinformation by quote tweeting it. They also exploit our bad habits, like our desire to mock people we dislike or disagree with, to get us to spread content that we'd be better off ignoring or reporting to social media platforms. So what should we do when we encounter false information? Every situation is different, but here's a general framework to help guide your decision making. First, take a moment to consider the potential impact of the false information. Are people's rights or safety at risk, like when bad actors try to confuse people about upcoming elections or the climate crisis? Or is it something less consequential, like inflammatory statements made by professional provocateurs, such as like the idea that companies who send inclusive holiday greetings are waging a war on Christmas? Those things that are used to distract us from more important conversations. Then do your best to assess how widely the disinformation is spread. Is it circulating in the mass media or highly visible on multiple social media platforms? Or has it only been shared by a few people and with a limited audience? Once you have a sense of the content's impact and its spread, you're in a much better position to choose how to respond. If the content is high impact and high spread, you want to inoculate, expose, and report it whenever possible. Work with your networks to spread accurate information and expose the bad actors responsible for the disinformation without repeating it. If the content violates social media platform policies, report it. If it's high impact and low spread, you want to inoculate and report. Work with your networks to spread accurate information in case they encounter the problematic content, but be careful not to draw additional attention to it. Report the content if it violates social media policies, or reach out to trusted organizations who may be able to work in the background to get the content taken down. If it's low impact but high spread, ignore and inoculate. Don't engage with distractions. That gives it a broader audience. Work with your networks to keep sharing more important information and encourage your networks to avoid clicking, sharing, bookmarking, commenting on things that are intended to upset and distract them. And if it's low impact and low spread, engage strategic silence. Ignore it and it will go away. Stay focused on spreading your own message. Do not get sucked into spreading theirs. Maintaining response discipline takes focus, especially when you see a piece of information you know is wrong and you want to make things right. But you have to remember that one of the goals behind misinformation and disinformation is to mislead people and misdirect our attention. By becoming more intentional about how you navigate your information environment, you can make sure that the bad actors don't successfully misdirect you, while also protecting your overall mental and emotional well-being. 3 ways you can do that are to set intentions or to decide why you're engaging with social media or other sources of information before you log on. Set boundaries, which includes deciding who and what you'll engage versus ignore. And then set limits, which involves deciding when and how long you'll engage with various media, as well as when you won't. One reason why bad actors frequently succeed in sowing confusion is because people with better information don't always know how to communicate it effectively. But with awareness and practice, we can close some of the communications gaps that bad actors exploit to misinform people. So let's talk about some of the most common pitfalls science advocates struggle with in our communications. Then we'll talk about how to correct them. The first pitfall we'll unpack is centering facts and statistics over storytelling. Now, please don't mishear me on this. Facts and statistics are incredibly important. Well-researched evidence is critical for policy design and implementation, but on their own, facts and statistics are simply not sufficient for public communications. When we talk about data while bad actors tell false stories about people, we lose. fMRI studies and related cognitive research consistently affirm what teachers and storytellers have known for centuries. Human minds rely on stories to make sense of reality. So when we emphasize isolated facts instead of coherent stories about the issues we face, we make it harder for people to understand and connect to what we're talking about. This leaves audiences vulnerable to manipulation by unethical storytellers. The next pitfall to be aware of is telling doom and gloom stories. A growing number of campaigns and causes now understand and embrace the importance of storytelling in our communications. Unfortunately, many advocates lean on what I call doom and gloom stories, which may help people understand what's wrong, but doesn't necessarily show them how they can change it. If our communications send the message that the problems we're organizing against are unsolvable, that makes our calls to action seem pointless. This also helps bad actors' efforts to overwhelm and exhaust people into giving up instead of taking action to promote causes that matter. Another pitfall we need to address is myth-busting and being reactive instead of moving our own agenda. It's important to address bad information, but taking a reactive approach to opponents' provocations and focusing on fact-checking and myth-busting their assertions further amplifies their agenda instead of building ours. Exploiting this tendency is actually built into their strategy because it puts us in the position of amplifying their mis and disinformation while distracting us from our core messages and overarching goals. So, especially if you see the myths versus facts, you'll notice that the myths are often so big where the facts are really tiny in comparison. It's really hard to follow. The next pitfall for us to examine is manipulating audiences through fear and anger. People are already angry, afraid, and overwhelmed, yet many campaigners mistakenly believe that they need to deliberately stoke outrage or anger in order to drive actions. But piling onto the negativity that's already pervasive in this information environment is not only harmful to our audience's mental health, it's also a strategic misstep. Fear-driven communications often make audiences feel so overwhelmed that they shut down and do nothing, while stoking anger contributes to the compassion fatigue and burnout over time. All of that is bad news for campaigns that need to help people take sustained action to make long-term changes. Another pitfall we want to carefully avoid is using the passive voice. Many of the problems we're organizing against didn't just happen. People made decisions that resulted in bad outcomes. But when we don't name the people and social dynamics responsible for those circumstances we face, we confuse our audiences and make it harder for them to understand how they can take action to solve the problems we're discussing. We also give cover to decision makers who undermine our community's well-being, and we run the risk of making our solutions appear mismatched to the problem. So for example, when we say things like global temperatures have risen versus human activity, including burning fossil fuels and clearing forests, has raised global temperatures. When we use the passive voice in our communications, we also inadvertently blame victims of identity-based discrimination for the discrimination that they face. When we just name disparities in outcomes without naming who and what is responsible for those disparities, we make it seem like a person's identity is responsible for the problem instead of the people and institutions discriminating against them on that basis. So for example, marginalized communities have high instances of asthma and other chronic illnesses as a passive construction, whereas politicians choosing to build power plants and route trekking corridors near marginalized communities has led to higher instances of asthma and other chronic illnesses in those communities. Big difference. The last pitfall I want to warn us against is overestimating opposition and underestimating our power. Bad actors capitalize on our perpetual underdog messaging because it often leads us to amplify the idea that they're more numerous and powerful than they actually are, which helps them to manipulate would-be action takers into giving up hope. So for example, there's a number of people who support climate action and a very distinct minority who don't. But we tend to overfocus on the people who don't at the expense of mobilizing the people who do. Bad actors use money and influence to cover for the fact that they're outnumbered. So when we say things like money always wins over people, we reinforce the idea that we need their help or agreement to catalyze positive change, even though we already have enough supporters to make the changes we need if we focus on mobilizing them in more transformative ways. And even in places and issues where our causes don't yet have majority support, it's our goal to build enough support to become the majority. We can't do that if we communicate that what we want to accomplish is impossible or that the bad actors are too powerful to overcome. Now that we've examined some common communications mistakes advocates tend to make, let's talk about how we can correct them. Instead of centering facts and statistics in our communications, it's more powerful to use individual stories to illuminate collective trends. Again, I want to emphasize that facts and statistics are important. We just need to situate them within the context of people-centered narratives that folks can understand and connect to. Representative Cori Bush offered a great example of this while promoting the Unhoused Bill of Rights she introduced in 2021. Drawing on her own experiences as an unhoused working mother, she explains what it's like and what society can do for millions of other people who still need housing and support. Good storytelling helps us explain facts and statistics in real-world terms, while helping people see that issues we might have thought were ours to shoulder alone are actually collective responsibilities. Another way we can avoid communications pitfalls is by naming what is and emphasizing what's possible, instead of repeating doom and gloom stories that send the message that things are hopeless. Effective messaging and storytelling conveys just enough about a problem to help people understand it, while reserving the bulk of our airtime to showing people how much better life will be when they take action to solve it. Here we have an example of a graphic showing how every home in Washington, D.C. could be powered by solar energy for the same amount of money the U.S. spends just looking for new fossil fuel sources every year. Expanding people's sense of what's possible is an important way to overcome bad actors' efforts to overwhelm and exhaust people into inaction. Showing people what we can do to overcome a negative status quo helps us cultivate a sense of safety and possibility, so people will start to feel secure enough to take a chance on change. Instead of myth-busting and being reactive, we can use news cycles and real-world incidents to advance our own narratives and overarching goals. By getting clear on our purpose and the overall narrative we're trying to advance, we can use timely news hooks or even highly visible disinformation attempts to attract attention to our key causes and messages instead. So for example, during this moment where Donald Trump was spreading disinformation about voting, my co-authors and I took an attempt to mislead and misdirect people into forfeiting a safe, convenient voting option and turned it into an opportunity to promote the messaging and actions we were already trying to elevate. Another way we can avoid the pitfall of manipulating audiences through fear and anger is by meeting people where they are to lead them somewhere better. It's not necessary to exploit people's emotions. Instead, we can acknowledge their existing hurts and fears and then show them how they can be part of building solutions to the problems that harm them and the people they care about. Giving people a sense of what they can do to address the problems that scare and upset them is kinder and more powerful than playing into their anxieties and outrage. When we share strategic paths forward in aspirational, actionable terms, we give ourselves and our audiences clarity and hope. Those are far more sustainable sources of motivation for our work. Instead of using the passive voice, we can name actors and systemic dynamics that are responsible for the conditions we're organizing to overcome. Environmental degradation, injustice, and oppression don't just happen. People make decisions that create those conditions. Naming those dynamics helps audiences move from a state of being passively overwhelmed to purposefully engaging. And last but not least, instead of overestimating our opposition and underestimating our power, we can learn to speak from a position of power, the power of the people and of truth. No matter who you are or what your cause, you have some kind of power. Own it. We have more public support on many issues than bad actors do. That's why they work so hard to manipulate us into taking unhelpful action or doing nothing. Showcasing our victories or our growth and momentum if we're not yet in a winning position gives people hope that they can help make a positive difference. Everyone wants to join a winning team. When we tell the right stories with the right calls to action, we help close the communication gaps that bad actors exploit to spread lies and confusion, while showcasing the kinds of causes and campaigns that matter most to us. Over the years, I've observed that messages that test well with audiences and drive successful campaigns typically share three traits in common. They're accurate, aspirational, and actionable. Focusing on these 3 A's in our communications helps us simultaneously inoculate people against disinformation while helping them understand why and how to take action on the issues they care about. So let's break down what these 3 A's mean, then look at an example of what they look like in practice. An accurate message reflects truth as validated by experience and rigorous research. We care about accuracy not only because we believe truth matters, but also because that's how we ensure our proposed solutions will actually address the real-world problems we're trying to overcome. Accurate messages also help people make sense of things that matter to them, which helps them resist bad actors' attempts to confuse them about those issues. An aspirational message offers an attractive possible future that inspires audiences to answer your calls to action. To break through the sense of inevitability and hopelessness people may feel about making change, we have to give them glimpses of what's possible, glimpses that are compelling enough to give them a sense that it's worthwhile to invest their time, energy, and/or money into making that change. An actionable message offers clear, practical next steps that people can take to move us closer to our desired future. As advocates, one of our most important responsibilities to our audiences is to help them understand what they can do about whatever problem we're discussing with them. That's often what makes the difference between inadvertently contributing to bad actors' efforts to overwhelm and exhaust them into inaction, or raising awareness in ways that move people to action. Let's revisit an example we saw elsewhere about protecting voters during the pandemic. Here we explained why protecting voters is important and exposed Donald Trump's false accusations against elections officials. We affirmed that we have everything we need to make voting safer and more convenient, and that we can protect our health and our votes instead of giving into a false choice between our safety and our rights. And we showed people what they can do to help make this a reality by registering to vote and telling their legislators to fund public health protections at the polls. When it comes to persuasion and communication, repetition rules. One reason why bad actors work to get us to repeat their lies, even if we're doing it to raise awareness that they are lies, is because our brains retain information that's familiar to us, even if it's inaccurate. Psychologists have a name for this, the illusory truth effect. People will come to believe false information is true if it's repeated enough times to become familiar to them. So when we're trying to dispel the disinformation spread by bad actors, it's critical that we avoid repeating their lies whenever possible. It's the classic don't think of an elephant warning. Our minds cannot picture negating words like don't or not, but they can picture the content we're trying to help people avoid thinking about. If we want people to not think about something that's false, we need to give them something else to think about instead. We need to replace, not repeat, misinformation. Our goal in learning how to avoid communications pitfalls and the kinds of accurate, aspirational, and actionable messages we can share instead is to avoid reinforcing the bad information in people's minds and instead replace bad information with better information. So let's look at an example of what that looks like in action. In this example, I flipped a tweet that unintentionally reinforced negative perceptions about masks to emphasize the benefits of masks instead. There's so much more that could be said on the topic of fighting disinformation, and I hope you'll continue to plug into resources and networks that can help you in this work. You're off to a great start, so thank you for taking the time to learn and teach others these practical ways we can work together. Let's develop the knowledge, skills, and discipline we need to reclaim our information environment from bad actors and raise awareness for causes that we care about.